So I think we can jump in and start with an introduction to a short introduction to the project and the speakers and topics today. So I think, Walter, if you can, I will stop sharing my presentation, and I think you can jump in.
My name is Walter Rossing, and I'm based at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And in this webinar, I will introduce the Agroecology Transect project briefly, as Chilak said, and the speakers of today, and moderate the question and answer session after the presentations with the great help of Anna and Chilak. On behalf of the Agroecology Transect project, I'm very happy to welcome you at this 8th Agroecology Transect webinar. Chilak is helping me out with my one-screen mode. In this project, where Transect stands for Transdisciplinary Approaches for Systemic, Economic, Ecological and Climate Change Transitions, as you see on the slide, we started in September 2022 for 4 years, meaning we're 2.5 years into the project. Our global ambition, also written on that slide, is laying the groundwork for agroecology as the future of farming in Europe by learning, engaging and inspiring action. So not just by science, let's say. In brief, our aim is to contribute to the unfolding of the full potential of agroecology for European agriculture by quantifying the potential of agroecology for 3 domains: climate change, mitigation and adaptation, biodiversity conservation in farm ecosystems, and for farm socio-economic resilience. And today we will hear 2 presentations on the climate change mitigation and adaptation, particularly adaptation domain, and the farm socio-economic resilience domain. Generic scientific knowledge we try to connect to local experiential knowledge, which is present in what we call 11 innovation hubs that at the start of the project had been involved in agroecological transformation for more than 4 years. So no newcomers. You see them as the yellow drops on the map. In the next slide, Chilak, thanks. Go on back. Yeah, that's great. The research organizations are depicted as green triangles, sometimes linked to an innovation hub and sometimes not. Together with the Innovation Hub facilitators, we co-produce actionable knowledge. And by this, we mean locally relevant knowledge that actors can use for action. So this close interaction with actors and scientists is very important. And such knowledge may be new knowledge, but we have seen various instances where bringing together existing knowledge in new ways can help empower actors to take action. To generate actionable knowledge, we are a consortium with 19 partners from 12 countries, and the partners include scientific organizations, NGOs, and private consultants. Among the scientists in our consortium, 50% have a natural science background, half come from the social sciences, and we have an equal share of women and men in the project. Of relevance to today's webinar, we will hear from the French Innovation Hub in the Massif Central called Coccinelle. And the Romanian study was done outside of the Romanian Innovation Hub, as the work had been finished before the start of the project. However, the Romanian Innovation Hub also concerns large-scale arable farming concentrated in the east of the country in the Danube Delta, which is an organic region. We see the unfolding of agroecology, and now please the next slide, in terms of the multi-level perspective to transitions. In this slide of the well-used MLP framework, you see in blue the dominant socio-technical regime, and in pink, the niche innovations. The socio-technical landscape in green at the top puts pressure on regime and niches. so that new things can appear, changes can happen. At all levels, a felt need for change may lead to opportunities for the niche innovations to what we call anchor in the regime. Next slide, please. And that anchoring can have a new and shared vision on agroecology as a technology, as a network, and as an institutional structure. And there the institutions are represented by things that organize our way of doing, organizations, rules, norms, and values. The idea is that the society created a certain regime, we all did, and if it causes more problems than it solves, it can also be replaced, at least over longer periods of time, hence the word transition. What we do in the project is to use scientific analysis and reflexive innovation strategies to see how anchoring of the Innovation Hub niches can be stimulated. The next slide shows the various work packages in the project and the central role of these two. Next slide, please. Work package 3 and 4, as reflected by the large number of person months input. The aim of the work packages can be summarized as follows. And maybe you can click with me with my speaking, Chilak. Work package 3 brings together the innovation hubs with the aim of keeping the energy high and helping the innovation hubs to move to their goals strategically. Strongly connected is work package 4 that focuses on defining with the innovation hubs relevant indicators for success, measuring them and analyzing them. Work package 2, 5 and 6 are more analytical, scientific work package. Work package 2 analyzes how agroecology is described by societal actors and by scientists to evaluate the role that agroecology can play in a European context. Work package 5 then is concerned with good examples of agroecology networks and tries to extrapolate across Europe, supporting scaling out and opening up discussions. Scaling up then is addressed in work package 6, to where we try to address connections to policy level. And work package 7 has the important role of influencing the narrative around agroecology. And finally, work package 1 oversees the entire project, but in a particular way. And we think we have very interesting developments there on the governance and the management of such complex science-society interfaces from the special perspective that enhances learning in these transdisciplinary projects. And with all the living labs and all bioregions coming up, we think we have a lot to offer there in terms of experiences and scientific analysis. Switching now to today's program, we focus on, the next slide, please. We focus on adaptation strategies of farmers to climate change or to climate variability, as Christiana will say. The project, after all, is in a climate call of the European Commission. We will hear about the role of permanent grasslands in the French farmers' adaptation strategies, and we will hear about the vulnerability adaptive capacity of the strategies of the Romanian farmers. Both studies have used interview techniques to collect the information, and both studies take a systems perspective. In that they don't just look at individual adaptation measures, but they see them as coherent farmer strategies. These are the commonalities. And if you click, we will see the differences. In France, the study assessed farmer values and farmer experiences with climate risk to explain their strategies. In contrast, in the Romanian study, greatest yield losses experienced by farmers due to climate variability were related to their adaptation strategies over the last 5 to 10 years. For the scientifically interested in the audience, the study also offers differences in the approach they take, with one starting more from theories and the other more from the farmer statements. And a warning to finish this introduction, the results are a call to action for farmers, for advisors, for policymakers, and therefore also for scientists. So please do listen, but then be prepared to take action. And with that, let's move to the presentations by Bertrand Dumont and Christiana Nekula. Following these presentations, we expect to have time for questions and answers, as Chilak explained, and together with Anna and Chilak, I will collect and possibly connect questions and remarks that you can put in the chat while you're listening. Over to the first speaker, Dr. Bertrand Dumont. Bertrand is a senior researcher at INRAE, and he is based in Clermont-Ferrand in France. He is an animal scientist, an agroecologist, and not the least, the coordinator of the Agroecology Transact project. Please, Bertrand, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Walter. I hope you can see my screen. I put it.
Can you put it in presenter mode, please?
Yes.
Perfect.
Is it correct? Okay.
Yes.
So thanks a lot for this introduction. So on this slide, so we will first move to the French Massif Central. On this first slide, you see again the same map as Walter presented with our 11 innovation hubs. I just put some colors on them to highlight that with these innovation hubs, we investigate indeed adaptation strategies across of a range of different farming systems. The green ones are grassland-based system in France, Switzerland, and Bulgaria, and the yellow one are the arable system, including Romania, but we also have work in Denmark, Belgium, and the Netherlands. And we also have integrated crop livestock system, perennial system, and horticulture in the other innovation hubs. And the other thing I should say is that what I will present today, focusing on French Massif Central, was part of a PhD of Lucie Allard. And if you are interested, you can read more detail on this work in this paper that was published last year in Renewable Agriculture and Food System. So why are we interested in climate change in Massif Central? We are definitely a grassland-based area. Massif Central is considered to be the largest grassland of Europe, indeed. And we know that there is a strong impact of climate change on upland grass-based systems. There are impacts on fodder availability, which is shown by this picture. We also, climate change generates shifts in vegetation communities, especially in upland areas, and it also affects forage quality for the animals, and it has direct and indirect impacts. And from this meta-analysis that was published in 2015, one important thing was that we highlighted that some pioneer studies suggested that response to extreme events can differ from those obtained under moderate warning and drought. And this is something on which we will come back during this presentation. So in this system, farmers need to adapt to increase the resilience of their system. And to adapt, they can change their production goals, they can change the animal breed, they can change management practices, and they can change also the feed resource on which they rely. And overall, what we are asking, Walter already mentioned that we started from a more theoretical background. We want to investigate how adaptation strategy of farmers are driven indeed by their cognition and by farm geographic context. And you see that what we will deal with on cognition is how they perceive climate change and how they perceive permanent grassland. And to do that, we conducted semi-structured interviews in 15 dairy farms from Massif Central. Our strategy was not to find farms that are representative of all systems, but we aim to target farms who are as different as possible, also to investigate, to assess, to have more information on the range of adaptation. So I mentioned that we want to see how this adaptation strategy differ according to the geographical context. So I'm sure that you are not all familiar with French Massif Central. This is the big green patch on the French map. And the blue dots represent the 15 farms that were surveyed, and they are along more than 200-kilometer long latitudinal gradient from Puy-de-Dôme to Aveyron for those who know France. So these farms were at different altitude, and this difference in latitude and altitude generate different history for the farms. The higher the altitude, the less risk of having summer drought. And when you move south to the south of France, you have increased risk of having summer drought and some extreme drought during summer. So on our theoretical background, we used this paper from Grossman and Pat that was published in 2005 to analyze how farmers perceive climate change. And we opted for a pluralistic approach of biodiversity that is also endorsed by EPBS to analyze the different worldviews of farmers related to nature and to biodiversity. I will tell you more about these two frameworks later. And really the question we ask is, according to their perception, according to the geographical context, what will be the adaptation strategy of farmers? Will they rely only on the diversity of permanent grassland, or will they rely on the diversity of feed resources? So first, some elements on our theoretical framework on how on the individual process of farmer adaptation to climate change. You see that in this framework, there are a number of variables, and we assess risk experience. We assess the capacity farmers think they have to adapt to climate change, their perception of importance of negative impact of climate change. And indeed, we selected 6 qualitative variables. And from these qualitative variables, we were able to carry on a multiple component analysis and clusterization that led to 4 clusters that explained more than 70% of the inertia. And so these are the 4 clusters. And before telling you more about these clusters, this is a warning sign. We will provide counts for transparency reasons on how the research was conducted, but of course a wider sampling effort would be needed to provide understanding of the frequency with which each levels of intention to adapt occur in French Massif Central. So I will say that 3 out of 15 farmers have this or that strategy. It does not mean that we are thinking that 20% of the French Massif Central dairy farmers adopt this strategy. So we have 4 clusters. The first cluster in black is composed of 4 farmers who think their system is ready to adapt. They consider climate change risk as something existing, but their system is ready, and their perceived adaptive capacity as high, resulting from choice they already made in the past. The 5 farmers in the second cluster in red also have a high climate risk appraisal. They perceive also their adaptive capacity as high, but they have not yet implemented new adaptation options, but they are sure to adapt in the future. So these together, these 2 clusters composed of 9 farmers are those we will qualify later in the talk as those who are ready to adapt. But there are others, those in green, and we have 3 farmers in this case. They foresee little room for maneuver. Their climate risk appraisal is also high. But the difference compared with the 2 previous clusters is that their perceived adaptive capacity is low. And they favor adaptation to hazard, so in the short term, and have not yet decided on a long-term strategy to adapt. And finally, last but not least, and it's the first first output of our studies, finally, 3 out of these 15 farmers do not intend to adapt. And I will come back on this later. So from this analysis, we observed finally very similar narrative than in previous studies. The study from Mitter and collaborators in Austria investigated a wide range of farmers, livestock farmers, but also crop farmers. And they came also to this quite similar typology with farmers who are already ready and farmers who show some skepticism. Another general output is that farm adaptation results from incremental change over time. This is called path dependency by Sutherland and collaborators. And some significant events along this path either facilitated or blocked the transition. And there are also those who can explain why free farmers do not intend to adapt. Among these events, extreme climate events, for instance, in France and in most parts of Western Europe, we had a very severe drought in year 2003. And for two farmers, for instance, it really changed. It was the starting point when they really changed their fodder system, while another farmer now who doesn't want to adapt has a mindset of fatalism. For instance, he mentioned that for him, in the future, the climate of Massif Central will be the same than in Andalusia. And for that reason, he thinks that there is no possibility to adapt, and he did not intend to adapt. The second type of drivers of adaptation are social drivers, and especially intergenerational transmission appears to be a key driver. The two other farmers who do not intend to adapt at this stage really put a responsibility to adapt on the next generation. That's why they are not doing anything now. While in two other farms, there was really during the process of transmission, a fruitful dialogue between the old and the young farmer, and they decided on adaptation together. So you see that these different important events can either facilitate or block the transition. Now I move to how we analyze the perception of farmers, the perception of biodiversity, and more broadly of human-nature relationship by these 15 farmers. From the IPBES background, it's important. First, they recognize that it's important to account for farmers' narratives and farmers' values. And they are also developing a framework that is the Nature Future Frameworks. And in this Nature Future Frameworks, biodiversity, nature, and human-nature relationship are considered along 3 pillars that they are calling nature for nature, nature as culture, and nature for society. Nature for nature deals with the intrinsic value of biodiversity. I will never see any whale in my life, but I'm happy to know that blue whale exists. And I'm not happy when I see that some governments want to hunt them. This is the intrinsic value I give to biodiversity. The cultural and relational value is related to but part of the biodiversity is part of our environment. Some farmers, for instance, refer to the flowering grasslands. We did also this survey in the Netherlands. They mainly refer to waters. This is part of our environment. This is part of our culture. And in French, Massif Central, also the fact that we produce cheese and which quality is affected by what cows eat is part of our culture. And the last dimension, nature for society, refers to the instrumental value of biodiversity. This is really what we usually call supporting services, regulating services. This is how, from biodiversity, it can help farmers to produce milk and cheese in our case. But a number of authors, including ourselves, in the PhD of Vincent Oostfugel, have mentioned that it's important to also account for the negative dimension that are being called the disservices. And this is what we will do in this study. So just to explain you what are the disservices on these different dimensions. On the intrinsic dimension, we know that grass-based systems preserve farm habitat. These are the services, but we also know that some management practice can have deleterious effects on biodiversity. On the instrumental value, we acknowledge that grass-based diets reduce inputs, And so it can benefit both the environment and farm economic performance. We know also that grazing multi-species grassland can delay drop in milk yield curves, but usually we also know that they provide lower milk yield per lactation. This is one disservice. Also, grassland type diversity increases management flexibility. Agri-environmental measures provide financial support. This is considered among the instrumental services, but these farmers also consider that these ecosystem services are not sufficiently remunerated. That's why they also see the negative side of it. And for cultural services, grass-based system using a variety of grassland types makes sense for them. It's part of their identity. It's part of why they relate to their environments. But they also mention that management constraints imposed by agri-environmental measure can also reduce their decision-making capacity. That's why they also perceive it as something potentially negative. So that's why some examples of how we dealt with the negatives. And this framework can either be used to analyze how farmers frame their overall relationship with nature and with biodiversity, or how they frame some specific issue. And in this talk, I will report on how the perception of permanent grassland, the values and these values they associate to permanent grassland frame their adaptation strategy. And if I come to the result, indeed, we observe from these 15 farmers for adaptation, 4 types of perceptions. There are 4 out of these 15 farmers who consider the different pillars of the nature future frameworks. They refer to intrinsic value of permanent grassland that provides habitat for fauna and flora, and they also refer to the relational value. It's part of their identity. They consider grassland biodiversity as a legacy. They know that it influences milk and cheese quality. And they also perceive instrumental value. And this instrumental value is only perceived by 5 other farmers. And in this instrumental value, the 2 groups are broadly referred to the same elements. Further nutritional quality of this diverse grassland that is high. A few inputs are needed to produce milk and milk. Less work is needed. It's easy to manage this grassland. In Massif Central, we have some vole outbreaks, and they consider that having different type of grassland in their system provides resilience to vole outbreak. And they think that for the quantity is high enough, and they acknowledge the payment for ecosystem services. So 9 out of these 15 farmers only see the advantages of these farmers, but some of them have a broader vision of these advantages. And then for the other farmers, 2 farmers think that the instrumental value of this permanent grassland is high, but they also have some instrumental disvalues, the lower grass yield. They consider that these permanent grassland are very sensitive indeed to these vole outbreaks. And the fact that you never plug the soil could result for them in soil compaction. And 2 other farmers also see the negatives, and what makes them different compared with the previous group is that the relative balance for them between the positive and the negative is different. And for them, they see more disadvantages than advantages. And so the disadvantages are the same, but they also add that low milk yields may affect system resilience and also the low operability of this grassland. And finally, the last 2 farmers, and these 2 farmers are among those who do not want to adapt. When we ask them about biodiversity in general, they never mention permanent grasslands. They only mention agrobiodiversity from grass legume mixture and temporary grassland. They mention hedgerows, but they do not spontaneously mention permanent grassland. And now the final result is that indeed we observe straightforward relationship between perception of permanent grassland by farmers and their adaptation strategy. To build this graph, we only dealt with the 9 farmers who are ready to adapt. And you see this straightforward relationship between perception of permanent grassland and adaptation strategy. And you see that there is also a geographical context impact. Farmers in the north of Massif Central and in southern uplands have not yet experienced very severe droughts, and they mainly refer to the values of permanent grassland, and therefore their adaptation strategy. In their adaptation strategy, they try to benefit from intra-plot or inter-plot diversity of permanent grassland, and also they try to benefit from hedgerows. For farmers in the southern hills, they mainly highlight the disvalues of permanent grassland, and because they already experienced some very negative summer droughts, and consistent with this, they base their adaptation strategy more on temporary grassland, more on forage crop rotation, and in some cases on trees. They develop some agroforestry in their system. And so for their adaptation strategy, they no longer rely indeed on permanent grassland, but rather they rely on crop rotation, protected by hedgerows, and on trees, implementing trees in the system. And this brings me to the conclusion that strategies employed by upland dairy farmers of French Massif Central depend on their intention to adapt, which partly results from their climate risk appraisal and from their perception of the values and disvalues of permanent grassland. And farmers in southern hills who are already experiencing drought severity in a warmer climate have a low perception of the instrumental value of permanent grassland, and therefore opted for temporary grassland, forage crops, and trees to adapt to climate change. And they develop grass-legume mixture, temporary grassland that are well adapted to climate change. And I would like to mention this is exactly what we are analyzing in another of our innovation hub in Switzerland. And this grass-legume mixture and temporary grassland indeed stabilize grass yield on farm, and therefore they can stabilize production, milk yields. And the fact that grass production on these plots enables farmers to obtain higher milk yields or to build up fodder stocks indeed can reduce the productive pressure they put themselves on permanent grasslands, because these grasslands have a different function in their system, and putting less pressure on productive grassland can indeed benefit their biodiversity, because they mainly graze heifers at a relatively low stocking rate on this permanent grassland, and we know that this is very good for biodiversity. So there are less permanent grassland in their farm, but these grasslands are very properly managed, and so this limits the negative impact on their adaptation strategy on biodiversity. And finally, this study highlights the complex interconnection of socio-physiological factors. I mentioned transmission to the farm to the new generation, and of environmental factors. I mentioned the effect of extreme drought that can either trigger or block the transition. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bertrand.
Stop sharing.
Thank you. And while Christiana is setting up her shared screen, I will introduce you. So we are now moving to our second speaker. While audience, please, any questions on the presentation for further clarification. There are many elements in this study across a geographic range, across different ways of interpreting what farmers are saying. Put it in the chat, and we'll come back to it with pleasure. Christiana Nekula received her MSc degree from Wageningen University. And it was based on the work that she is presenting here, and that was published in Agronomy for Sustainable Development a little while ago. Christiana runs her own organic farm in Romania and is at the same time an agricultural consultant. And she is also keeping a vivid interest in science as you can infer from her being here today. Well, the presentation is set up. Let's listen to Christiana. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you for the introduction. So I will continue with our study case in Romania. And as an outline, I will briefly describe the general context, some concepts that we used. Of course, afterwards, I will explain all the results that we had, the consequences for policy makers and farmers. We know, of course, climate change is already impacting Europeans' daily lives and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. But what's very important for farmers is that climate change has made extreme events more likely and more severe. Almost everywhere in Europe, the observed shift towards drier summers is predicted to become more accentuated in the future, together with an overall increase in variability of rainfall. So these phenomena have been referred to as an increase in climate variability, which poses a major challenge to agriculture. So simply put, it's very likely that in many regions of the world, farmers now are operating in a more unpredictable context. Romania has been facing as well an increase in the frequency, intensity, and duration of heat waves, most pronounced in southern Romania, with an increase in frequency of extreme rainfall events as well, a decrease of snow cover in winter, and ever drier conditions overall in the warm season. On the map on the right, you can see that most of the country experienced a significant drying trend between 1958 and 2023, also confirmed by the future predictions. And the most affected areas happen to be the southern and eastern parts of the country, on which we also focused on. I would like to mention that the Agroecology Transect Innovation Hub is in Tulcea area, the most eastern county of Romania. You can see it on the map, displayed in dark red. Examples of exceptional years for agriculture, exceptional in a negative way because of extreme and prolonged drought, were the spring of 2020, when we actually collected the data, the summer of 2022, when personally I didn't harvest any maize, and 2024, which was the warmest year on record in Romania. So large-scale surveys have been undertaken on Romanian case studies, and they show that farmers are in majority conscious of climate change and state to know about adaptation actions, although the results diverge on how much action they actually take or took. So what was missing, and we realized this by the time we started the study, what was missing was a systemic perspective of the entire farm and patterns of change. So the next slides describe a scientific perspective on changes towards agroecology. At farm level, climate variability is a source of recurrent disturbances of both environmental and market factors. And this threatens, on one side, crop yields, and on the other side, the farm income. Therefore, farm sustainability as a whole. We therefore looked both at crop production practices and financial management tools as possible adaptation measures of farmers to this context. And what we considered is that the current thinking about monocultures and the focus on just producing crops in Romania needs to be questioned in favor of more diversity at field and farm level. The figure from a study of Titonel and Glisman illustrates the pathway towards ecological intensification in agriculture, mapping it along two axes. You see technological innovation and institutional innovation. So the diagram highlights a progressive shift from conventional agricultural systems to diversified agroecosystems. And this process passes through efficiency and substitution-oriented measures. In our study, we also used these concepts, the ESR framework, to evaluate the efficiency of the adaptation responses of farmers in Romania. And that's why I would like to briefly explain these concepts. So we have the current system, we call it conventional agriculture as well. This stage depicts traditional input-intensive farming systems that rely heavily on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and monocultures. And these tend to have high environmental costs. We have eco-efficiency then, which is a small step forward. This stage is focusing on improving input use efficiency without fundamentally changing the farming system. And examples include precision agriculture or better nutrient management. However, eco-efficiency alone does not drastically reduce environmental impact. We have input substitution, which moves towards replacing harmful synthetic inputs with more environmentally benign alternatives, but does not change the fundamental structure, again, of conventional farming. Finally, we have a systems redesign, and this is a major shift where the entire farming system is reorganized to work with nature rather than against it. And some examples of redesign practices include crop diversification, agroforestry, conservation, agriculture, etc. So these are the concepts that we also used in our study. Okay, two other concepts that we used were vulnerability and adaptive capacity. And briefly, we know vulnerability is the predisposition of a system, of a farm in this case, to be adversely affected. And adaptive capacity is the system's ability to adjust to perturbations caused by climate variability, to cope, moderate impacts, and potentially take advantage of possible opportunities. Our study area was represented by the southern lowlands of Romania, surrounded by the Danube River in the south and the Carpathians in the north. Here, deep Chernozem soils make Romania the Europe's breadbasket, where farmers are mostly into arable crops, such as wheat, rapeseed, sunflower, and maize. Our objectives were to characterize the adaptation responses of farmers from this region facing climate variability, and to see what do these characteristics imply about the vulnerability and adaptive capacity to climate variability of the farms. Briefly about our methodology. So we took 30 in-depth interviews of farmers, collecting data about the experienced climate variability, the production losses suffered in the past 5 to 10 years, and their adaptation measures, both in terms of farming practices and financial strategies. We then coded the interview transcripts for climate change measures and calculated the most severe production loss each farm suffered on their most important crops in the past years. With this data, we formed variables, 13 in number, and the various classes of responses within each variable. So this now quantitative data was used as input for archetypal analysis. And the answers, it's important to mention that the answers of each farm were taken as one observation, thus allowing to analyze patterns. And the next slide gives more information on archetypal analysis. So we wanted, right, to form typologies of adaptations. And we used archetypal analysis, which is different from methods such as PCA, principal component analysis, as it starts from extremal points and not from typical observations. So how it works, it takes extremal points, So we can call them also in our case outliers or outlying responses, and forms a group around it based on relatedness to it. And the best classification is one that achieves statistical balance between precision and effort. And in our case, we ended up with 3 archetypes, so 3 adaptation types. Our results show the type of adaptations that farmers in southern Romania are taking in response to climate variability. And in our perspective, this was very important because the scientific literature was missing such proof of how farmers are actually adapting. And we grouped these measures in production versus financial management practices at field and farm level. So I'll start with the production practices. At field level, these are the change in tillage practices, the inclusion of legumes or niche crops in the rotation, and the start of cover cropping. These are, if we take the 3 of them, they represent, in fact, the movement towards conservation agriculture in Romania, which is taking place, and it's advancing every year. We see also that some farmers, like over 40%, prioritize drought-tolerant local varieties over foreign hybrid ones, start quitting to cultivate sensitive crops, which is the case of maize, for example, or summer crops in general in Romania. Farmers are now shifting towards more winter-focused rotations. And they start to make changes in the fertilization strategy. Going towards the production practices at farm level, we noticed that over 50% of farmers start setting up irrigation systems in response to ever drier conditions. And we also noticed transition to organic farming among 20% of the interviewed farmers. The financial management measures are the use of risk management tools against the price volatility. And one example could be that some farmers split their selling contracts with spot and forward contracts. They purchase crop insurance, which we can see 70% of the farmers do. They start to integrate other side activities beside crop production in order to optimize profitability, and especially to have a buffer in very dry years. This is just to point out how the results of an archetypal analysis looks. So each farm represented in each line has a membership to each archetype. Some fully belonging, the ones that are marked in dark gray, others just partial, yet others unclassified, which for us in terms of interpretation was also interesting. These are the archetypes of adaptation responses that we identified and that we named based on the most distinctive features, let's say, the most distinctive adaptations that characterize them. So the first one is irrigation for conventional commodity agriculture, which is focusing on additional water for crops as the only way to survive. The second archetype, to which 6 farms belonged fully, is transition to conservation agriculture and niche markets, focusing on minimum tillage as a necessary change in response to drought. The third archetype is ecological and economic diversification, focusing on diversification as the way to go forth. And I will explain more how we evaluated these archetypes in terms of vulnerability and adaptive capacity. So the first archetype had high winter crop yield losses in extreme years. And of course, having irrigation on the farm had low summer crop yield losses. So its vulnerability was mitigated by irrigation in summer, but not in winter, because so the vulnerability for winter crops was not alleviated, and these farms have a continued vulnerability, heat, which causes pollen sterility during summer. We see on the right a photo from a farm which even if it has irrigation, there was crop calamity anyway. So this archetype represents the conventional system in southern Romania and has the least adaptive capacity, judging from the number of adaptations that these farmers took. The second archetype had moderate winter crop losses and high summer crop losses. Its vulnerability was mitigated by redesign of soil management, so a shift towards conservation agriculture, but little financial redesign, which made it still vulnerable to market volatility. This archetype was intermediate in terms of adaptive capacity, having a moderate number of adaptations. And we arrived to the third archetype, which was showing low to moderate yield losses in winter and summer crops. So its vulnerability, the vulnerability of these farms were mitigated by over 50% of measures classified as redesign. And this is the archetype with the greatest adaptive capacity, because it had a numerous and diverse range of adaptations that farmers took against climate variability. And we see in this figure that getting back at the ESR concepts, efficiency, substitution, redesign, we saw that archetype 3 had the majority of adaptations that were classified as redesign oriented measures, together with some substitution efficiency. So this made us to conclude that redesign, so an adaptation strategy doesn't only involve one step. It's a mix of measures, but what is important in this archetype is that the majority of them are focused on redesign. While the first archetype had the lowest number of representing conventional strategy, together with some efficiency measures that we saw shallowly addressed climate change. Archetype 2 is very important because it represents the conservation agriculture move in Romania, and it has a mix of all conventional substitution, efficiency measures, but not much redesign. And this is important to recognize. And me and together with the people that are interacting with many farmers in southern Romania, we are trying to also draw attention on this. So to conclude, our conclusions were that the full diversity of agroecological practices at field level, together with financial risk management, enabled farmers to respond effectively to the impact of the increased climate variability in Romania. We showed that ecological and economic diversification is the adaptation archetype with the highest potential to ensure resilience of the farm systems in southern Romania. Structural adjustments at field and farm level require attention. So the three farms that were classified under the third archetype may act as inspiring outliers, but also studying farms resembling types 1 and 2 may reveal which barriers hinder them from improving their current condition. So we also concluded that there is much potential for farmers' organization and policymakers in Romania to better integrate knowledge flows. And such knowledge can contribute to unfolding the potential of agroecology. And thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or just to say your remarks about our presentations, please do.
That's great. Thank you, Christiana. Excellent. Yeah, the floor. Is this? Yeah. The floor is now open for interaction with the speakers. We think it's useful to organize that through the chat. There isn't much yet in the chat, so please, any questions you have to the speakers on more information about how the study was done or the interpretation of the results, please post it in the chat and we will pick it up from there. You can also, for instance, ask about the consequences of this, because the studies are one thing, but the consequences, this call for action for the various people that I announced in the beginning, you may have questions on that. Now, the first question from the audience, very nice to have you on board, Anna from Romania. You have been involved in several studies regarding farmer adaptation to climate change. We may well have come across your writings. So please elaborate a little bit your stand on what this study said. Maybe you can write something about the difference with what you are finding and maybe your interpretation of the consequences for policymakers or for farmers. Having said that, a question to Christiana at this point, and then to Bertrand, is Christiana, in your study, what was the real? Was it similar to what the in the French study was found, that some farmers are age-related or transition to next generation related, where they're completely out of any adaptation thinking?
We did analyze whether the belonging to an archetype depended on age of the farmer or farm area or the belonging to a farmer's organization, but in fact it was not a significant correlation, which was actually a good news for farmers, because that means you, as a farmer, you can be part of, you can have a strategy similar to the archetype 3, so a very diverse and redesign-oriented adaptation strategy, no matter the farm area and no matter your age. I hope this answers your question, Walter.
Yeah, it does. I would also transfer that to Bertrand. So what in other studies, and also in my experience, it has been found that when young people come on board, so when there is a change towards a next generation of farmers, that is often the moment when the young people say, I want to do it differently because I see how much my parents have been suffering. You have listened to these interviews. You have talked to the people who did the interviews. What's your take on this? Why is there this fatalism among some of your farmers?
So in our case, first I would like to say that Lucie Allard is in the room. So if Lucie, if you want to add something to my answers, please raise your hand and feel free to add something. As you have seen, I've been very cautious on the generalization of our results, highlighting that we only have 15 farmers. I say only because doing this semi-structure interviews, analyzing them with 15 farmers is already an important work. So we were not really able to test for any effect of age. We were not able to test for any effect of gender also because we only had males in these 15 farmers. My experience here, and Lucie could comment on that, is that our experience is that, yes, some intergenerational transmission is key, and that at least in some cases, it generated a fruitful dialogue. It's difficult to see, to highlight some general trends. I remember out of these interviews, talking to teachers in agriculture school who finally reported that some of the young students were very much blocked by the thoughts of their parents. And when they talked about changing genotypes, they just answer, but yes, but you destroy genetic progress. So finally, being young does not necessarily, unfortunately, that you are open. But of course, in our interview, the time for transition in 2 cases, at least I remember from what Lucie said, was really the occasion to put new ideas on the table and to engage this dialogue. But we don't have any enough data to say whether this is a general trend or, but this can happen, of course.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Let's move to questions from the room, the audience. So Bertrand, I think this is particularly to you from Ankai. Thank you very much. How migratory pastoral systems experience exposure to climate stress compared to settled livestock farming. And now you need to draw on your animal science experience more than on this study, I'm sure.
Yes, because so there are some general trends that having the possibility for farmers to move their animals, especially in Mediterranean environments, open door for adaptation. In our environments, of course, farmers keep their animals on their farm, so they don't move their animals. But around in high experimental farm in Marcenat, we have many plots that are being owned by farmers from the south of Massif Central. And it's traditional that some farmers from the south of Massif Central indeed bring their cows to these mountain plots for the summer. And so this also happened. This did not happen in the farmers we surveyed, but this also is something important in our landscape. And one of the consequences is that also less land is available for local farmers because there's a pressure on land because these farmers coming from the south of Massif Central bring their cows there in summer. So this is we did not observe it with the farmers we surveyed, but changing the location of the animals can be part of a cultural landscape in this French Massif Central area. And then, of course, there's a lot of literature on the benefits of pastoralism, and one of its key benefits, one key lever, is to have this ability to change animals' location around the year to benefit from grass growth in some season, and to also avoid the worst season in the Mediterranean. In the Mediterranean areas. It's very well documented for sheep farming system, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ankai, I hope this answers your question. If not, continue in the chat. And then the very good question from Benoit, who's chatting from Lebanon. Have your studies led to issue recommendations to national public authorities? My warning, call to action, has that already happened? Thank you, Benoit. Who would like to answer this? Bertrand, Christiana?
So I could, the question about issuing recommendations to national public authorities, I could add that, okay, issuing direct recommendations to the Ministry of Agriculture in Romania, no, we did not achieve to do that. But we did give our recommendations in the discussion of our paper, and I think the most important ones are: first, study more the outliers, the ones that really redesign their farms and have a diverse portfolio of adaptation measures. Study also the ones that are less adapted and see what hinders them. And third, pay attention that conservation agriculture, being so in trend right now in Romania, seems to not be enough to ensure long-term sustainability of farms. If only farmers look at just changing tillage practices and starting cover cropping.
Maybe I can add from my observations of your study. Can you comment something on IDARE? This is a large farmer organization that also says their farmers are innovative. I have seen them do innovative work also in terms of knowledge collection. And you have specifically looked at if you could give recommendations to such organization where, well, maybe in the background, your study covered more than 50,000 hectares of farmed land, not just by this organization, but in total. So it doesn't always have to be ministries. It could also be farmer organizations who drive strategies for change.
Yeah, indeed, IDARE used to be a large organization. It is not that large anymore, but there are still a group of very innovative farmers meeting from time to time on their fields and discussing innovative farming practices. They supported our study, and I'm still in contact with them. I wouldn't say that, so they know the results of this study, and our recommendations were that, hey, there is much unused potential to support farmers in their adaptation process to climate variability, and use this potential to maximize their helping them to achieve that.
And to finalize this exchange with you, Christiana, on this point, so what is withholding you from going to the ministry, apart from being a farmer and being a consultant? Is it just that, or are there also other reasons? And I'm asking this because this is a hot topic in our project. Why is the gap to politicians, but policy makers, ministries, so large?
Yeah, practically speaking, in order to reach the table of decision makers, I would need to be maybe a larger farmer, but not necessarily. I would need to have a role in at least farmer organizations or associations of farmers. In Romania, all the farmers associations are grouped under a league, let's say, and they are doing the lobby for agricultural measures in the ministry. I am part of just a small farmers cooperative. As a farmer, we help each other in achieving higher discounts for inputs, and we are helping each other in selling our products. I think I would need to get to those higher lobbying organizations, but I did not have time to have such role.
Yeah.
as
That's
a
that's
farmer. Yes, but that's also the case for many other farmers.
exactly, yeah. So this is what you could call a structural problem. Bertrand, maybe the same line of thinking to you.
Yes, I think that also for us, it's difficult to reach the national level, but really it's not directly related to what I presented today. But I would like to highlight that in a grassland-based environment of French Massif Central, we have developed long-term collaboration. When I mean long-term, I think we started 15, 20 years ago. We are on the territory of a regional park, and we have a very fruitful collaboration with them. And we have especially developed a farm typology with farm advisors and also with a PDO cheese board. And really this typology in which we have described the multifunctionality of 60 different grassland types across French Massif Central has become something that where all people, researchers, farmers, farm advisors, the regional park, the PDO cheese board, work together to highlight the different values of this farm, of these grasslands. And we develop a set of indicators in which we not only accounted for the production dimension, but we also build this typology based on botanical measurements to also have an idea of the ecological value of this grassland. We also did some recordings of the potential of different type of grassland to sequestrate carbon in the soil. And as we know that the quality of milk, cheese, and meat produced on grass depends on the type of grass that the animal graze. We also had some indicators of milk, sensory, nutritional quality, and now we have started to also have some indicators of meat quality. And really, it's this local connection with different stakeholders that I think is bringing real change in this case on the perception of permanent grassland, so that farmers recognize the value of this grassland, that they can also manage them properly, so that they can also protect them from their ecological dimension. And it's also a way for us to explain how the milk and cheese produced in this area is different for its different properties compared from milk from lowlands. So I think it's more, we are more targeting the local, regional decision makers in this research.
Okay, very clear and very interesting parallels. Then maybe a point on what Christiana called the field level and the farm level. And if you remember that slide with all the bars going across, the overarching importance, in fact, of farm financial buffering in this adaptation strategy. Many farmers appear to have this as a strategy in place. So if we are now talking at the field level, that is important, but it should really be considered as part of a larger strategy that also allows farmers to survive in our system from a financial perspective. Well, to both of you, can you go in a little bit of detail whether the farmers in France are actually using such kind of system? And you may have just mentioned elements of that, Bertrand. And maybe Christiana then after, what kind of financial measures are they taking? Bertrand first, maybe?
Some of it, it's not what we studied in these farms, but there are, of course, some agri-environmental schemes that are based, that really aim to support the habitat value of some type of grassland. So that's why the grassland typology is important also to, because based on this grassland typology, when you visit a farm, you can also identify if there are some grassland type that are of conservation relevance. And also there are all the measures that support extensive farming system in uplands. The fact that cows are fed on forage, they graze and they are fed on mainly on hay. So this is part of the practices that are being that can be paid for the farmers. Also, in our farm sample, we have some farmers really something key, and this make a link also with Christiana's presentation, is that transformation on the farm, not only selling milk, but transforming milk on farm and selling cheese is also strongly supported in our area. And we have, for the different cheese, some specific areas in which a given cheese can be produced and some specific rules for this production. And finally, also we try to, so those farmers who can benefit from this, who can sell their cheese in line with this PDO specification, of course, are supported also by the PDO specification rules. And it's also part of what builds their revenue, I would say. And we're also targeting some farmers who are less lucky because they are not in the right area. They only sell milk. And some of these farmers are also much more open to innovations because they are also not in the best position to compete with the others.
Okay, yeah, clear. Thank you. Christiana, maybe some insights on this financial management buffering role.
Yeah, thank you for this question, because financial management is very, very important for the sustainability of farms facing climate change. We know the economic dimension is one of the dimensions of sustainability. And I would like to point out, actually, from my experience with farmers, that financial considerations are the first triggers to change. So the change to no-till is because a farmer wants to reduce costs. And that's why it's so important, the financial aspect. But coming again back to the results of our paper, the type of adaptations that farmers took were the use of risk management tools to against price volatility. We know that there is a lot of price volatility on commodity crops being on an international market. So this involved, in fact, forward contracting. Some farmers split their production into, let's say, 2-3 contracts to sell them prior the harvest, during the harvest, and after the harvest. This entails some storage capacity, and it's forward contracting. It's used in the hope that prices will go up after the harvest season ends. This is not always the logic that happens, but due to Ukraine war and etc. But it's the usual logic. Then some farmers use crop insurance, but from my experience as a farmer, it's very expensive. So this is the cost of it limits its adoption. However good that this adaptation, this measure is, especially for summer crops, which are very sensitive to drought and scorching heat. And one other financial management measure was to integrate other businesses within the business of crop production. And most farmers tend to do that nowadays because they see there is a lot of instability of income in agriculture. So they start to use their capital, to use their machinery, for example, and their buildings, and give them some other purpose. For example, starting to give services to other farmers with their machinery, or just as a crop farmer get into livestock farming in order to diversify the income sources. These are some examples.
Okay, thanks. I see we have time for one burning question. And if not from the audience, then I would have it. Interestingly, in the French study, you looked at, let's say, sort of mechanisms underlying adaptive behavior, the values framework. So you identified the values that drove the decision so far. How much can values change? And I'm asking this because there's a nice parallel to the Romanian study in which we say, well, those type A and A1 and A2 farmers, they have not changed dramatically yet, but they might. And maybe that also involves a change in values. So Bertrand, help us out. What's the likelihood of values changing?
So to answer this question, I think that we need first to be able to measure the values. And this is what we try to do with our framework. Because really, so we did indeed survey more farmers, but only presented part of our results on values because some of the farmers were not interviewed for their adaptation to climate change. But we provided this framework, and we tested indeed 30 dairy farmers from French Massif Central, and we compare them with 30 dairy farmers from Dutch lowlands. And from these 30 farmers, indeed, 1/4 of these farmers, 25% of these farmers, farms separate from biodiversity. They highlight the disadvantages of biodiversity rather than the advantages. And for the remaining 3/4 of these farmers, half have a broad vision of biodiversity, combining intrinsic, instrumental, and relational value, while the other half mainly focuses on the instrumental value. And what I would like to highlight is that this typology of narratives is indeed very robust, because we found the same 3 narratives with Dutch lowland farmers, and sometimes with different proportion, and it seemed to be, we seem to observe some more extreme choice of the farmers, and because there were more farmers farms separate from biodiversity. And we also had a fourth type of farmers that we called farmers farming for biodiversity, where the biodiversity conservation goal is as important than the production goal, or even more important than the production goal. And what I would like to highlight is the fact that this narrative typology, or this value typology, can be used in a completely different environment, shows that it is robust and that we can use it as a tool. And we need such tools to answer indeed your question, because now we can come back to these farmers some years ago to see if they change or not. But really, without having tools, I think we cannot answer seriously this type of question, apart from our observation, our dialogue with farmers. Because some mentioned they have changed, but really providing a tool, I think, is our contribution to the community to be able to answer your question in the future.
Good. Stick around, we'll tell you more. Christiana, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was just thinking that indeed, also in our case, would be interesting to get back to each group and analyze how they think. I was just thinking of that, and thank you for everyone.
And I would just like to add that we ask this question of values because you will not engage the dialogue with a farmer who only sees the instrumental value of biodiversity the same way as a farmer who fully acknowledges his intrinsic and his cultural value. By understanding who you are talking to, you can also adapt your dialogue and come to a fruitful dialogue on how to reach some ambitious environmental goals within farming environment. That's why we focus on values. It's really to be able to understand each other and to really account for that the farmers are not a monolithic group. They are, when you talk to a farmer, maybe you come with some ideas in your mind because it's your own perception of the farmers. But when you talk to them, they don't say the same. And if you are not able to adapt to their values, to their narratives, I think that your possibility to communicate become lower. That's why we went into that direction.
Yeah, very nice complementarity between the studies, and lots of opportunities to engage in research together, but also to take along for communicating about change and making it actually happen. This is the end of this discussion. Time has run out. Thank you very much to both speakers for their engaged conversations and their stepping out of the study also. To all of us, let this be the beginning of a new session with people from the project, but also outside the project, rather than be the end of this seminar only. And you can always contact us in person or reconnect at next Agroecology Transact webinars or the Agroecology Transact Roadshow version 2. We already had one version. And you see all the contact details in the chat. Benoit, we're going to answer your question in the chat still. Please, speakers, have a look at that and see if you can answer to Benoit's question from the Lebanese Agroecological Coalition. With that, thank you very much, and back to Chilak, I think, or Anna.
Yeah, it's me. So thank you, big thank you to Christina for coming on this morning and sharing your insights, but also Bertrand and Walter for moderating the Q&A and presenting the project. So big thank you to you all, and also for the questions that came from all attending today. Yeah, just a couple of things. I did share some links in the chat to our social media, which we keep updated with any upcoming events or outputs of the project that you might find interesting. So do keep an eye out. We have a very interesting lineup of webinars and roadshow for 2025. So we will shortly, we'll update our sites to show you these upcoming events and the topics that we'll cover. So I think that's pretty much it for today. So we do look forward to you joining us again in the coming months. Have a very nice lunch, everybody, and thank you.
Have a good day as well. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.